World War I. Welcome to another edition of Fun Facts and History. Today, we will be discussing World War I, also known as the Great War. World War I began in 1914 after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. His murder catapulted into a war across Europe that lasted until 1918. During the conflict, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire, the Central Powers, fought against Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, Romania, Japan and the United States, the Allied powers. Germany, Russia, Great Britain, and France were all drawn into the war, largely because they were involved in treaties that obligated them to defend certain other nations. Major cause of the war: the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Tensions had been brewing throughout Europe, especially in the troubled Balkan region of Southeast Europe, for years before World War I actually broke. A number of alliances involving European powers, the Ottoman Empire, Russia and other parties had existed for years, but political instability in the Balkans, particularly Bosnia, Serbia and Herzegovina, threatened to destroy these agreements. The spark that ignited World War I was struck in Sarajevo, Bosnia, where Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was shot to death along with his wife, Sophie, by the Serbian nationalist, Gavrilo Princip, on June 28, 1914. Princip and other nationalists were struggling to end Austro-Hungarian rule over Bosnia and Herzegovina. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand set off a rapidly escalating chain of events. Austria-Hungary, like many countries around the world, blamed the Serbian government for the attack and hoped to use the incident as justification for settling the question of Serbian nationalism once and for all. Assurance of Germany to Austro-Hungary and the commencement of the war. Austria-Hungary did not declare war until its leaders received assurance from German leader Kaiser Wilhelm II that Germany would support their cause. Austro-Hungarian leaders feared that a Russian intervention would involve Russia's ally, France, and possibly Great Britain. On July 5, Kaiser Wilhelm secretly pledged his support, giving Austria-Hungary a so-called carte blanche, or blank check, assurance of Germany's backing in the case of war. The dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary then sent an ultimatum to Serbia, with such harsh terms as to make it almost impossible to accept. World War I begins. Convinced that Austria-Hungary was readying for war, the Serbian government ordered the Serbian army to mobilize and appealed to Russia for assistance. On July 28, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and the tenuous peace between Europe's great powers quickly collapsed. Within a week, Russia, Belgium, France, Great Britain and Serbia had lined up against Austria-Hungary and Germany, and World War I began. The other causes of World War I are as follows. The Bosnian crisis, where Austria-Hungary took over the former Turkish province of Bosnia in 1909, angering Serbia. Countries were building their military forces, arms and battleships. Some countries wanted to regain lost territories from previous conflicts and build empires. The Moroccan crisis, where Germans were protesting in 1911 against the French possession of Morocco. A tangle of alliances made between countries, to maintain a balanced power in Europe, which brought about the scale of the conflict. Did you know that World War I was known by other names? These names include the War to End All Wars, the War of the Nations, and the Great War. Where was most of the fighting done? The majority of the fighting took place in Europe along two fronts, the Western Front and the Eastern Front. The Western Front. According to an aggressive military strategy known as the Schlieffen Plan, named for its mastermind, German Field Marshal Alfred von Schlieffen, Germany began fighting World War I on two fronts, invading France through neutral Belgium in the west and confronting Russia in the east. On August 4, 1914, German troops crossed the border into Belgium. In the First Battle of World War I, the Germans assaulted the heavily fortified city of Liege, using the most powerful weapons in their arsenal, enormous siege cannons, to capture the city by August 15. The Germans left death and destruction in their way as they advanced through Belgium toward France, shooting civilians and executing a Belgian priest they had accused of inciting civilian resistance. First Battle of the Marne. In the First Battle of the Marne, fought from September 6 to 9, 1914, French and British forces confronted the invading German army, which had by then penetrated deep into northeastern France, within 30 miles of Paris. The Allied troops checked the German advance and mounted a successful counterattack, driving the Germans back to north of the Aisne River. The defeat meant the end of German plans for a quick victory in France. Both sides dug into trenches, and the Western Front was the setting for a hellish war of attrition that would last more than 3 years. Battle of Verdun. Battle of Verdun, February 21 – December 18, 1916, was among the longest and bloodiest conflicts of World War I. In the battle that slogged on for 10 months, the French held off a major German offensive. By the end, casualties numbered to about 400,000 for the French and 350,000 for the Germans. In total, about 300,000 were killed. Battle of Somme. Battle of the Somme, July 1 – November 13, 1916, Allied offensive in World War I. British and French forces launched a frontal attack against an entrenched German army north of the Somme River in France. A week-long artillery bombardment was followed by a British infantry assault on the German positions. Nearly 60,000 British casualties, including 20,000 killed, occurred on the first day. The offensive gradually deteriorated into a battle of attrition, hampered by torrential rains in October that made the muddy battlefield impassable. By the time it was abandoned, the Allies had advanced only 8 kilometers. The staggering losses included 650,000 German casualties, 420,000 British, and 195,000 French. The battle became a metaphor for futile and indiscriminate slaughter. On the eastern front of World War I, Russian forces invaded the German-held regions of East Prussia and Poland, but were stopped short by German and Austrian forces at the Battle of Tannenberg in late August 1914. Despite that victory, Russia's assault had forced Germany to move 2 corps from the Western Front to the eastern, contributing to the German loss in the Battle of the Marne. Combined with the fierce Allied resistance in France, the ability of Russia's huge war machine to mobilize relatively quickly in the east ensured a longer, more grueling conflict instead of the quick victory Germany had hoped to win under the Schlieffen Plan. It is time for our next fun facts about World War I. Did you know that 8 million soldiers died in World War I and 21 million were injured? 65 million troops were mobilized during the war, 8 million troops died and 21 million troops were wounded. Gallipoli campaign. With World War I having effectively settled into a stalemate in Europe, the Allies attempted to score a victory against the Ottoman Empire, which entered the conflict on the side of the Central Powers in late 1914. After a failed attack on the Dardanelles, the strait linking the Sea of Marmara with the Aegean Sea, Allied forces led by Britain launched a large-scale land invasion of the Gallipoli Peninsula in April 1915. The invasion also proved a dismal failure, and in January 1916 Allied forces staged a full retreat from the shores of the peninsula after suffering 250,000 casualties. Russian Revolution. From 1914 to 1916, Russia's army mounted several offensives on World War I's Eastern Front, but was unable to break through German lines. Defeat on the battlefield, combined with economic instability and the scarcity of food and other essentials, led to mounting discontent among the bulk of Russia's population, especially the poverty-stricken workers and peasants. This increased hostility was directed toward the imperial regime of Tsar Nicholas II and his unpopular German-born wife, Alexandra. Russia's simmering instability exploded in the Russian Revolution of 1917, spearheaded by Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks, which ended Tsarist rule and brought a halt to Russian participation in World War I. Russia reached an armistice with the Central Powers in early December 1917, freeing German troops to face the remaining Allies on the Western Front. America enters World War I. At the outbreak of fighting in 1914, the United States remained on the sidelines of World War I, adopting the policy of neutrality favored by President Woodrow Wilson while continuing to engage in commerce and shipping with European countries on both sides of the conflict. Neutrality, however, was increasingly difficult to maintain in the face of Germany's unchecked submarine aggression against neutral ships, including those carrying passengers. In 1915, Germany declared the waters surrounding the British Isles to be a war zone, and German U-boats sunk several commercial and passenger vessels, including some U.S. ships. Widespread protest over the sinking by U-boat of the British ocean liner Lusitania traveling from New York to Liverpool, England with hundreds of American passengers on board in May 1915 helped turn the tide of American public opinion against Germany. In February 1917, Congress passed a $250 million arms appropriations bill intended to make the United States ready for war. Germany sunk 4 more U.S. merchant ships the following month, and on April 2, Woodrow Wilson appeared before Congress and called for a declaration of war against Germany. World War I and the use of aerial technology and tanks. World War I was the first major conflict to harness the power of planes. Though not as impactful as the British Royal Navy or German U-boats, the use of planes in World War I presaged the later, pivotal role in military conflicts around the globe. During the First Battle of the Marne, information passed from pilots allowed the Allies to exploit weak spots in the German lines, helping the Allies to push Germany out of France. As aerial technology progressed, long-range heavy bombers like Germany's Gotha GV, first introduced in 1917, were used to strike cities like London. Their speed and maneuverability proved to be far deadlier than Germany's earlier Zeppelin raids. By war's end, the Allies were producing 5 times more aircraft than the Germans. On April 1, 1918, the British created the Royal Air Force, or RAF. The first air force to be a separate military branch independent from the Navy or Army. Time for another fun fact. Did you know that some German citizens were striking and demonstrating against the war? The British Navy blocked German ports, which meant that thousands of Germans were starving and the economy was collapsing. Then the German Navy suffered a major mutiny. After German Emperor Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated on November 9, 1918, the leaders of both sides met at Compiègne, France. The peace armistice was signed on November 11. By the end of the war, 4 empires, the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the German Empire, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire had collapsed because of the war. Second Battle of the Marne. With Germany able to build up its strength on the Western Front after the armistice with Russia, Allied troops struggled to hold off another German offensive until promised reinforcements from the United States were able to arrive. On July 15, 1918, German troops launched what would become the last German offensive of the war, attacking French forces joined by 85,000 American troops as well as some of the British Expeditionary Force in the Second Battle of the Marne. The Allies successfully pushed back the German offensive and launched their own counteroffensive just 3 days later. After suffering massive casualties, Germany was forced to call off a planned offensive further north, in the Flanders region stretching between France and Belgium, which was envisioned as Germany's best hope of victory. The Second Battle of the Marne turned the tide of war decisively towards the Allies, who were able to regain much of France and Belgium in the months that followed. Toward armistice. By the fall of 1918, the Central Powers were unraveling on all fronts. Despite the Turkish victory at Gallipoli, later defeats by invading forces and an Arab revolt that destroyed the Ottoman economy and devastated its land, and the Turks signed a treaty with the Allies in late October 1918. Austria-Hungary, dissolving from within due to growing nationalist movements among its diverse population, reached an armistice on November 4. Facing dwindling resources on the battlefield, discontent on the home front and the surrender of its allies, Germany was finally forced to seek an armistice on November 11, 1918, ending World War I. Time for another fun fact. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles officially ended the First World War. The treaty required that Germany accept full responsibility for causing the war, make reparations to some Allied countries, surrender some of its territory to surrounding countries, surrender its African colonies, and limit the size of its military. Treaty of Versailles. At the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, Allied leaders stated their desire to build a post-war world that would safeguard itself against future conflicts of such devastating scale. Saddled with war guilt, heavy reparations and denied entrance into the League of Nations, Germany felt tricked into signing the treaty, having believed any peace would be a peace without victory, as put forward by President Wilson in his famous 14-point speech of January 1918. As the years passed, hatred of the Versailles Treaty and its authors settled into a smoldering resentment in Germany that would, 2 decades later, be counted among the causes of World War II. Effects of World War I. As many as 8.5 million soldiers and some 13 million civilians died during World War I. 4 imperial dynasties collapsed as a result of the war: the Habsburgs of Austria-Hungary, the Hohenzollerns of Germany, the Sultanate of the Ottoman Empire, and the Romanovs of Russia. The mass movement of soldiers and refugees helped spread one of the world's deadliest influenza pandemics, also called the Spanish flu. The map of Europe changed forever as territories were divided among the victorious Allied powers. The war led to the October Revolution in Russia, which put the Bolsheviks in power of the Russian government. The United States emerged as a world power. Chemical weapons, such as mustard gas and phosgene, and new technologies and developments, such as machine guns, tanks, and aerial combat, were introduced. A protocol signed at the 1925 Geneva Conference for the Supervision of the International Traffic in Arms restricted the use of chemical and biological agents in warfare. Growth of nationalism in Central and Eastern Europe set the foundation for World War II. This brings us to the end of this episode of Fun Facts and History. Watch out for our next edition covering World War II. Please like, share, comment and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.